My name is Haskel Hollander. I presently live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was assigned to the 341st Field Artillery Battalion of the 89th Division in the European Theater of Operations. At that time, at the conclusion of the war, there was a shortage of chaplains of the Jewish faith. At Camp Lucky Strike, which was a departure point from France to Japan, which was during the time of the conflict between the Japanese theater of war and at the conclusion of the European War, I was assigned to a chaplain named John McDonald, who was with the 354th Infantry Division. The reason I was assigned to this chaplain was because of the need for a Jewish chaplain to conduct services at this camp. So on August 30th, 1945, I became an acting Jewish chaplain at Camp Lucky Strike in France, where I conducted services. One day I received a memo that there would be a chaplain's conclave in Brussels, Belgium, and some of the soldiers would be selected to attend this conclave. I applied for it and was accepted. On September 29, 1945, I attended this conclave at the invitation of Chaplain Benjamin Gorelick. When I attended this chaplain's conclave, which was in Brussels, Belgium, I met a number of Jewish chaplains, Chaplain Saperstein, Chaplain Grobman, and also I met the chief rabbi of Brussels, Rabbi Ullman. We were very fortunate, those of us who attended, and this included I. Joel Phillips, and Leon Reinhardt, and myself, to attend this conclave. Not only did we become familiar with the chaplaincy, but we were introduced to the problems of the DPs and also of the many orphanages that existed in the city of Brussels. At the conclusion of the chaplain's conclave, I returned to my outfit. After a while, I asked to be reassigned, since I heard that my division, since the war ended in Japan at this time, was to be deactivated. So I asked to be reassigned to Chaplain Gorelick in the Chandler Bay section in Brussels. Fortunately, I received the transfer and was able to join Rabbi Gorelick. During this period of my assignment to Rabbi Gorelick in Brussels, I found myself deeply involved with the orphanages and also with the DPs. Already a tremendous program was underway to aid the DPs and the orphanages. One post office near Brussels was used as a receiving depot for clothing, food, and other supplies being shipped in from the United States. These articles had to be distributed to the various orphanages, and this had to be done at night. So there'd be no problems with the United States Army and with the commanders, so that we would be able to do this activity without any problems. So that while we worked during the day as chaplains, it was during the evenings that we delivered the supplies to the various homes. This went on for quite some time. Suddenly, one day, Rabbi Gorelick, Chaplain Gorelick, myself, and I. Joel Phillips were called in to the office of the colonel of the chaplain section. He informed us that we were using the United States Post Office for civilian use. And while he felt badly that he had to tell us this, he informed us that we had to stop using this post office immediately or we would all be court-martialed. We, of course, advised the colonel that we would not make use of this post office, and we didn't want to place him in jeopardy, so we would cut out this program of distribution of supplies and food. Following the meeting, Chaplain Gorelick and Joel Phillips, myself, discussed the situation. We couldn't see how we could let down the people and the DPs and the orphanages, and we decided to locate another post office which would continue where this other post office had begun. Fortunately, we were able to find another receiving station, and we continued receiving the supplies and delivering them until the Chandler base section closed. I would like to tell you of an incident that happened to show you the feelings that the orphanages had towards us. One day, while I was in an orphanage in the city of Brussels, where I used to attend Sabbath services, one of the children asked me, "What is Coca-Cola?" I tried to explain to him. He said, "The only way I would know what it is if I could just taste it." So with this, I returned back to my headquarters. I relayed the story to members of my battalion, and I asked, what could I do? How could I get enough Cokes to give each child in this orphanage? The problem there was that we were allotted just one Coke a month per soldier. Fortunately, every soldier that I asked gave me his Coca-Cola allotment for the month. And when I had enough of the Coca-Cola bottles to provide one for each child in the home, I went back to the home on a Friday afternoon and told the rabbi, who was the superintendent of the home, that I would like to have these Cokes kept cold and distributed to the children on the afternoon of the Sabbath when they had their Mincha services, which was called, after the Mincha service, a Shalosh Shudas program. I personally couldn't wait to see the reaction on the children's faces when the time came to pass the Cokes out. Just as I expected, when the Cokes were brought into the room, there was bedlam. The children jumped up and down and screamed and cried and were so happy and so thrilled. And this went on for maybe a half an hour before they could settle down and drink the Cokes. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. Another experience that comes to my mind was with another home in Brussels called Ottergem. These children were a little bit smaller and real cute, and they loved the Jeep I used to drive. The Jeep did not have springs that worked in the back, and when I stepped on the gas, the back end of the vehicle would jump up and down, so that anybody sitting in the back of the Jeep would be pushed up and down when I stepped on the gas. I was told that a lot of these children had such unfortunate circumstances, it would be almost impossible to get them to smile again. They couldn't understand what happiness was. So I mentioned to the rabbi that I would like to take a few of the children in the back of my Jeep and drive them around and see how they react to it. And with that, I placed 6 or 7 children in the back of the Jeep, really packed them in solid, and I drove along, stepping on the gas, and the back end of the Jeep would jump up, and the children were in such a laughter, they were enjoying it so much, that after this experience, every time I came to this home, the children ran up to my Jeep and asked me for a ride so that they could enjoy themselves, which I was more happy to do every time I saw these children. There was a Jewish club in Brussels which was sponsored by the British, and at this club we were able to receive kosher meals, and not only were American GIs coming to this club, as well as the British, but also members of the Jewish Brigade. The members of the Jewish Brigade were absolutely the most wonderful people I ever met. They set up all kinds of programs. They had Haksharas. They traveled all around to the different orphanages and helped out with the DPs. They're very active in many, many areas of activity. But one day, a member of the Jewish Brigade and someone from the British Jewish group, I believe it was a chaplain, suggested that we have a Hanukkah party for the children from the various orphanages. I thought this was a good idea. We all agreed that we would get the children down to this club and provide them with latkes and singing and all kinds of holiday cheer, which we did. I have a photograph of this, which I have submitted, showing how pleased the children were with this program and how happy we were to be together with the Jewish Brigade and the British soldiers of the Jewish faith. After the program was all over, we sang a song or two and then concluded the program with the singing of Hatikvah. During the course of the singing of the Hatikvah, a drunken British soldier came running in to the room and started making all kinds of noise and exclamations detrimental to the Jews who were there. And with that, a member of the Jewish Brigade went up to this man and lifted him up over his head and carried him out and threw him out of the building. And all the children cheered him, and it sort of ended up the evening in a pretty wild note, but everybody was happy that they were able to celebrate the Hanukkah together. One day, I was approached by a individual, I don't remember his name, but he was in charge of the victims of Nazi persecution. And he came up to me and asked me if I could obtain some uniforms, shirts, pants, underwear, shoes, any articles of clothing I could get together, because a large number of DPs were coming into the Brussels area. Many of them had no clothing. Many of them were people who had been hiding. Many were at one time in concentration camps. Some were in forced labor camps. And so I went back to my fellow soldiers and asked them what we could do to get some clothing. The quartermaster, who happened to be not Jewish, said, "Here's what I'll do for you. It's against the rules and against the regulations, but I think we can do it without any difficulty if no one says anything. How will it be," he says, "if you went around and told the men to turn in any article of clothing which had a rip on it or a mark of some kind, and with that, as they turn in these articles of clothing, I will issue them new clothing." All right? I approached the men, and they all agreed to do this, and over a period of a few weeks, I don't know how many pairs of pants and shirts and other clothing were turned in to be replaced, but I received an awful lot of it. And this was in turn turned over to the DPs. The interesting part was that instead of turning over the clothing that had little rips or tears in them, the men insisted I take the new clothing that was issued to them, and then they went back and received back the uniform they turned in. This showed the tremendous cooperation we received from the men of another faith. They wanted to help. If only someone would ask them to do anything, they would do it. And this pleased them a great deal. When I reported back to them and told them how much good this clothing was doing so many people. During my stay in Brussels, Rabbi Joseph Luckstein came to the city as a representative of the President of the United States. When he arrived, I was his chauffeur, and I drove him around different parts of the city and indicated to him the different orphanages and some of the problems that the DPs were facing. And he was very interested in knowing as much as possible, so that when he did speak to the top commanders, I'm sure the proposals he was going to make was that the Army do as much as it could to alleviate some of the plight of these people. Rabbi Luckstein was truly a wonderful representative of the Jewish people because he was so forceful. And one particular occasion showed this to me. When I picked him up and took him to what I thought was the hotel that he would be assigned to, which is one of the finer hotels in Brussels. We came in to this hotel, and we were assigned a room. And we got up to the room, and he said, "This is not fitting for a representative of the United States. Is there another hotel?" I said, "Yes, there is another hotel in the Metropole." He says, "What kind of activity goes on there?" I says, "Well, this I would think you'd be going to, because that's where all the diplomats are and all the Army generals and so on." He says, "By all means, take me to this hotel." So we went to the Metropole Hotel. When we got there, a corps of men were there awaiting his arrival, and they escorted him into the hotel. And he turned to me and he said, "Now, this is the way the representative of the United States should be treated." As I had mentioned before, I had met a number of men of the Jewish Brigade. One man came up to me, a soldier of the Jewish Brigade, and he asked me if I wouldn't mind taking him at night in my Jeep so that he could see his sister. Told me that when he had left for Palestine, fortunately he was safe, and he feared for the worst for the rest of his family who had to remain in Poland during the war. And while he was in Brussels, he heard that his sister had survived, and she had just arrived at a Hakshara, which was located something like 50 miles out of Brussels. I can't remember the name of the Hakshara or the community. However, I said to him, "I'll be glad to take you to see your sister." So we left about 6 o'clock in the evening, and we got to the Hakshara safely. And I don't have to tell you, when he was reunited with his sister, what an affectionate and emotional period this was for not only the soldier of the Jewish Brigade and his sister, but everybody who was there gathered around them and sang and danced, and it was such a marvelous spirit and such a marvelous feeling that was exhibited at that point. And the two of them sat down and talked, and as you could well imagine, time was passing on. It was getting very late. And I told the soldier that we would have to get back before 6 o'clock in the morning so that we had no problems reporting to my outfit. At any rate, after a while, we decided to leave again. And on the way back, it was raining. And I had to make up time because of the lateness of the hour. While I was not speeding, I realized the roads were very slippery. And everything was going along fine till I reached the outskirts of Brussels, when I was trying to navigate a curb, and the car just kept going and went into a ditch. We were both thrown from the Jeep, and when I came to, I found him lying down with his nose bleeding, and I somehow awoken him, and he said, "I'm all right, don't have to bother with anything, just get me back to my outfit. You go back to your outfit, I appreciate all you've done for me." I said, "I can't take you now, the way you are, we'll have to do something about your condition." So we went into a home, the house right near where we had the accident, and as early as it was, the people invited us inside, gave us a cup of coffee, offered us cigarettes, and they were wonderful to us. We explained to them who we were, and they were more than happy to do what they could for us. And then he said, "We must leave now," so we did. And I was sorry I didn't take the name and address of these people. I would have written them and thanked them for what they did. At any rate, when we got back to the Jeep, we found that half of the Jeep was on one side of a ditch and the other half on the other side. And the question was, well, how do we get this Jeep out of this precarious position? First of all, it was a miracle that the Jeep motor actually started. Finally, we flagged down a British truck, and they pulled us out of this ditch. And through some miracle, we were able to navigate that Jeep all the way back. I was able to drop him off at his outfit, and I was able to get back in time to my outfit. When I arrived at the gate of the compound where the Jeeps were kept, the officer there asked me, "What happened to your Jeep? It's all smashed up." And quickly I explained, "Well, isn't it terrible? Look at how I found my Jeep in this condition." And he said, "Isn't it a shame?" And see, I had the name Chaplin inscribed on my Jeep, and he says, "Well, Chaplin, what we'll do is get you a new Jeep tomorrow." And lo and behold, the next day, I had a new Jeep assigned to me. By the end of that year of 1945, the sector known as General Base Section was closed, and all of us were reassigned. By this time, Rabbi Gorelick and I, Joel Phillips, had both returned to the States. I was reassigned to Frankfurt, Germany, and assigned there to the chaplain's office. When I got to Frankfurt, I met a very fine chaplain, George Vida, who was in charge of services in one of the hospitals in that area. And he also worked with the Jewish Welfare Board. And while in Frankfurt, I became familiar with the members of a colony of Jewish people who were placed in what used to be a concentration camp known as Salzheim camp. The Jews who occupied this camp were a remarkable group. Not only were these men and women and children survivors of concentration camps, many who had been hiding away from the Nazis and managed to survive, but the amazing thing was that this was not just a place for them where they would try to regain their health, but rather it became an institution with educational programs, dramatics, creative arts, all kinds of activities, so that they would prepare themselves. And what they were preparing themselves was for Aliyah to Palestine. I was fortunate to be able to attend a play that was put on by the members of this colony, and I must admit that it was the most dramatic presentation I have ever seen. The actors and actresses were marvelous. The props and the scenes, everything was done professionally. The people who were in this camp had a great motivation to learn Hebrew and to become as strong as they could so that they could eventually find a new way of life for themselves in Palestine. One day, I met two young girls, probably 18, 19 years old, in this camp in Salzheim. And they asked me if they could find a job of some kind in a mess hall where they could earn some money and prepare themselves, hopefully, to go to the United States. I said, I don't know what your chances would be to get to the United States, but if this is what you'd like, I'll do all I can to help you. Fortunately, I was able to get them jobs in the mess hall of the camp in Frankfurt, and they worked there for some time. A few years later, I was in New York City, and on the elevator taking me up from the subway to the street above, near the Yeshiva University where I attended as a student. In the elevator, there were these two girls. They looked awfully familiar to me, and one of them, her name was Rosie, said Haskel. And that's when I was called by these two girls, and I immediately recognized them, and they recognized me, and it was a beautiful reunion. They managed to get to the United States, and eventually they were able to find jobs, and then they were married, and the last I heard from them, they had children and were very, very happy. While in Frankfurt, I had the opportunity of meeting Rabbi Philip Bernstein. Rabbi Philip Bernstein came from Rochester, New York, which is my hometown. He was a very dear friend of my father's. He knew me and my family. And when he came to Frankfurt, I met him at the airport. And when I went up to him and introduced myself as Hollander from Rochester, he says, no matter where I go, I always bump into a Hollander. At any rate, he had come to Frankfurt on a secret mission. The plane he was on was a private charter plane. No one knew what the purpose of his flight was. And he told me that in all confidentiality and secrecy, that he was looking around to see whether or not he would accept the offer that was made to him to represent the Jewish people to the United States Army Command, such as General McNarney and General McClay and others, who are the top commanders in the European theater of operations. And while we were driving from the airport to the city, he asked me what I thought about the situation. Could he be of any help? Would he be able to represent the Jewish people in such a way that he can be of great help to these people? And I told him how important it would be for him to accept the assignment, because I felt that he would be an ideal person to represent us, that he could certainly appeal to a man like McNarney and others to do a job to help the Jewish people if at all possible. And after talking to him at great length, he said to me, I'm almost certain that I'll accept this very important responsibility. And not too long afterwards, I found out that he certainly was to accept this position, and that he would succeed Judge Rifkind, who was then doing this work. Just before Passover, a chaplain arrived in Frankfurt named Chaplain Gans. Chaplain Gans and I decided that we would like to have a Passover Seder in Frankfurt. And where should we have this Passover Seder? We felt the most appropriate place would be the Palm Garden, where Hitler made his first speech on his rise to becoming the Führer of the German people. And so we went to the American authorities, and we asked them if it would be all right to use the Palm Gardens for this purpose, for a Seder, for the GIs, and also for civilians of the Jewish faith. We were given the okay to have these Sidorim. Unfortunately, just before the Sidorim, I was given my assignment to return back to the States. So ultimately, most of the work had to be done by Chaplain Gans. However, in the few days I had available to me, I was able to round up a number of Jewish civilians, the two girls I mentioned, and others, to prepare the food. We were able to get kosher chicken and all the necessities for an absolutely kosher Passover Seder. At the Seder, which I missed, and Chaplain Gans wrote me about, General McNarney was there, and the chaplain, who was the chief of chaplains, Chaplain Turnan, who was of the Catholic faith. During the course of the Seder, Chaplain Turnan went up to Chaplain Gans and said, you know, I'm of the Catholic faith, and while I'd like to remain here for your service, your religious service, I'm afraid I'll not be able to do so. And Chaplain Gans said, well, how will it be if you received orders from the chief chaplain, who was above you, Chaplain McNarney, that you had to remain for the Seder? Would you then remain? And Chaplain Turnan says, I would be most delighted to do so. And so Chaplain Gans went over to General McNarney and asked whether he would order Chaplain Turnan to remain for the rest of the Seder.